What are you going to do with that sword, girl?
He looks ready for you. He is ready to fight. You're ready. We will end this.
You're fucking dead.
So the latest Xbox release has now hit Game Pass, and Hellblade 2 Senua Saga is setting social media and YouTube on fire. At this point, it seems like the vast majority of responses and reviews are slamming the game pretty hard. And I'm going to be here today. Unlike past Xbox releases, I'm actually going to step in and do my best to defend Hellblade 2 Senua Saga, because I actually think that it serves a very specific and necessary purpose in the gaming landscape. But let's talk about it. So the current complaints about Hellblade 2 Senua Saga are basically the same as Hellblade 1 with some minor changes. The main ones being that the gameplay of Hellblade 2 is not very strong to very poor. It doesn't feel so much like an actual video game. It's not so gamer-like. It's really more of a cinematic episode where you're doing some minimal inputs, almost like a point-and-click type of thing, except you're not doing quite so many puzzles, although you are doing puzzles. In Hellblade 2, it's the same thing. They really haven't done much to change the combat. They also haven't done much to change what you're actually doing in the game, except for some minor twists on puzzling. And I think that the main reason why this game is being slammed right now is because Hellblade 1 is a one-of-a-kind type of game, at least when it was released. And there was so much that Hellblade 1 did right in terms of character building, in terms of providing an experience you really can't get from any other game. Fans basically just wanted to take everything that was good about Hellblade 1 and gamify it. Turn it into something that's more like traditional video games, something that's a little more fun. The problem is that the general nature of this game and Hellblade 1 are not fun. They are not something that is meant to get you all excited and happy. They are very sad and dreary and gritty and grimy and visceral stories that are going to be completely different than anything you're going to experience in pretty much any other series. Hellblade 1 and 2 are both extremely focused on delivering a cinematic experience that is unique, and the gameplay takes a back seat. Now, the problem is that there are many people, myself included for the most part, who prioritize gameplay over almost any other aspect of a video game. And when you have that kind of mindset, and you spend the vast majority of the game just holding your thumbstick forward to walk, probably holding down that bumper to make the character run faster, and then having a combat system that's honestly not very satisfying in terms of how it plays and feels, you're going to end up in a situation where those gameplay folks, those gameplay purists, really aren't going to like this game. So that's where the vast majority of the complaints are coming from. People who are really focused on gameplay, who liked the first game maybe, but had some real desires for it to change how it was made and focus on the game first. Now, I've been on record in past reviews talking about games that just have really poor gameplay, or games that really focused on gameplay first and foremost, and how that was a really big positive in terms of the overall experience, and you can overlook some of the negatives, some of the shortcomings of the game because of how good the gameplay was. A good example would be something like Stellar Blade, which I just reviewed. Stellar Blade's combat is really fun, the gameplay is excellent, but in terms of the characters, in terms of the way that it's developed, in terms of the story making any kind of sense, and the overall feel of the environment and the world, it's just not great. So it has some serious shortcomings, but because the gameplay is good, the overall feel of my review, the overall response, and my recommendations for the game were positive. I'll link the video in case you're interested in that. This game is quite the opposite. I do think that you should play Hellblade 2 Senua Saga, but the reason why you should play Hellblade 2 is because it's a completely different animal. Yes, the combat, the general gameplay is not very fun, but we're going to talk about some of the strengths of Hellblade 2 and how they may be at the top of the gaming industry. First and foremost, even in the reviews that are slamming this game, the thing that is absolutely undeniable is that Hellblade may be the most graphically impressive game in the history of gaming. I mean, we are talking the best of the best. There are almost no games that come close to touching the graphics of Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. And in fairness, especially after the updated release of Hellblade 1, that game still holds up graphically to this day as well. It has a style all its own and a pseudo photorealistic nature to it, particularly when it comes to the environments in the world, that is unparalleled. I mean, there were many times as I was playing through both games, but especially in Hellblade 2,
This stops now.
where I was basically in awe at the beauty of this game. It is incredible in terms of atmospheric elements, in terms of rain, in terms of dirt and blood and mud, gritty, realistic, brutal realism of Hellblade 2 is incredible. There is nothing like it. The next thing, again, another carryover from Hellblade 1, the audio of this game is incredible. Between the score, the voice acting, the use of the binaural audio, I mean, you really should be playing this either with an amazing surround sound system or more likely just a really good pair of headphones.
Now it is time to lead, Senua. Now you have to choose.
There is nothing like the audio of Hellblade 1 and 2 in the gaming market. It's completely different than anything else you've ever heard and sets itself so far above. The other thing is that this game is a cinematographer's dream in terms of a video game. This thing looks like a movie. You look like you are playing in a movie. And because of that, it does put some limitations on things like the camera angles, things like how you proceed through the game. And it does make certain things feel kind of monotonous, repetitive, and that they go on for long periods of time. You're not going to have any kind of fast travel in this game. There are no mounts, there are no modes of transportation, nothing. Just like in Hellblade 1, Senua and her allies plod along and they are grunting and breathing heavy and struggling the whole way through this game. But it's because of the overall experience, the design of the game, that this is happening. It's not because it's intentionally being boring, it's because of the brutal, realistic nature of the game, again, bordering on a playable movie. Alright, so we've talked about some of the things that are really similar between Hellblade 1 and 2. Let's talk about a few things that are different. The first is, this is not the same Senua from the first game. What I mean by that is, this is not Senua in the same position as she was at the beginning of the first game. This is Senua after she has progressed through the first game and come to the realization of how she has to be accepting of herself, how she has to move forward with her life, how she has to deal with loss. This is a much more settled Senua, although she's still dealing with psychosis, she's still dealing with these voices in her head, but her assertiveness, her leadership, her ability to make decisions in the face of adversity is much more solid and forceful than it was in the original Hellblade. And I think that's for a very specific reason, because in Hellblade 1, Senua's entire story revolved around the loss of her loved one and her fight to try and get their soul back. But in this game, Senua has now looked beyond herself and her personal loves. She's trying to look out for the others around her. She's trying to do her best to protect them.
He knows everything. He knows this island.
No.
He knows. He can show you the path.
You're gonna take me where I need to go. Yes.
Yes.
So the way that the story starts out, and I'm not going to get too deep into it because it's not a very long game and it's not going to be very difficult to spoil things, but Senua, at the beginning of this game, she has been captured, put into slavery, she is on a ship of slaves, and they are being transported to a place where something horrible is most likely going to happen to them. But the reason that she's on this ship isn't because her village was raided and she was captured, it was because she allowed herself to be captured because these Northmen have been coming and taking her people away. So in order to try and stop that, she allowed herself to be captured so she could be taken to the source and try to end the cycle of slavery once and for all. Now, what happens when she gets there is far from what she initially expects, And that's how the story kicks off. The reason why this is so different, beyond the fact that she's trying to look out for other people, is that she has companions over the course of this game. This is not a Senua alone story like the original, where it's just Senua and her dealing with her demons and the voices in her head. Senua has others around her who she's also trying to protect, defend, fight alongside, people she's trying to convince of the right way to do things, whose minds she's trying to help change, or in the case of a few characters in this story, whose minds she's trying to change because she sees so much of herself in these people. Because of her triumphs from the original story, Senua is now in a different position where she has dealt with the darkness inside of her to an extent, to the point where she can continue to live as a more decent and better human being. And now she can try to take all that she's learned and help others to move forward with their lives. All in all, this is really more of a redemption story than it is anything else. This is about people dealing with their inner demons and coming out the other side and trying to make for a better world.
That's it.
You told me that someone betrayed him.
About how people's pre-existing notions for why things are the way they are and who's actually responsible for their plights and what they have to do to try and break free of those plights, or at least buy themselves another day of peace, and how those things can be so wrong without them actually knowing it. And it's overall a really good message. I would say that the story of Hellblade 1 and Senua's individual strife is more impactful than in Hellblade 2, but this is a nice progression for the character, and despite the fact that some will tell you that it's a boring story that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, I think it actually makes a good deal of sense, and the introduction of these other characters is very helpful to see Senua's development, as well as to try and provide some stakes outside of the life of a single person. The other big complaint, and this is not different from Hellblade 1, is that this is a very short game. I think my playthrough was somewhere around 5 hours. They at some point said something about 8 hours. I did not go and find all the little side lore things, although I found almost all of them in the original Hellblade. But I think that my playthrough is probably a pretty indicative playthrough for most people, and it is a very short game. For a game. Keep that in mind. I still think that this is closer to a long-form movie with light puzzling and gaming elements. And if you look at it in that light, obviously a 5-hour-long movie or 5-hour-long runtime for a series is pretty significant. It's just that when we have the age of gaming where you have JRPGs that easily take you over 100 hours, where you have action-adventure single-player games that can be 20, 30, 40, 50 hours, 60 hours, easily on the low end when you're mainlining the story, this is a very short game. But I think the length is just a little too short. I don't think it's a lot too short. I think we just get to the resolution of the game too quickly. That all being said, the game you're actually playing, the story elements that you're playing through, are actually pretty strong. Now, the puzzling is very similar to the prior game. I think it's a little less frustrating than the first one. In Hellblade 1, the vast majority of the puzzles were just lining up the pieces, which could be very fiddly, and you have to try and get to the right area in order to try and look at that. Or it was one of those areas where you see the fire, and then you have to try and run through like a little mini obstacle course with different elements flying at you or exploding or something. The other thing they did in Hellblade 1 was where you would look at something that looked like it was kind of in pieces, and then you would have to get to the right perspective, like it was a staircase or something in pieces, and you'd have to get to the point where it kind of turns and it fits together and focus on it, and then it would snap together. Or it was the gates that you would look through, and there would be something different on the other side of the gate. You'd have to figure out what that was, and then walk through the gate, take advantage of whatever that change was, and then come back through. Those were pretty much the only puzzle elements to the original game. This one has a little bit of the lineup thing, although there are fewer of them and they're probably a little less frustrating. It does incorporate more in terms of perspective. For example, there will be different things you need to light up, and then they will create a path, but then you might need to go through the path and then douse a flame somewhere else to open up a different space. or they do some different things with perspective. But the puzzles that they changed, where there are different things you could do to change the area, change the landscape, they're totally fine. I don't think they're great, but they're okay. They're not very frustrating. They're not terribly difficult. They're not going to get you stuck too often. They're fine. Not fine enough for really great gameplay, but again, I don't think that's the focus of this game. I don't think that's the focus of this series. Again, it could be very lacking there, and it might be something to turn you off if you are so focused on gameplay. Alright, so with all my full game reviews, I do go through each of the main aspects of the game, rate it on a scale of 1 to 5, just like old school GamePro, and then I give an overall score at the end with my conclusion, which is more of a number that kind of coincides with a letter grade for the overall game. So, that being said, the first category up is graphics and presentation. And again, this may be the most graphically impressive game in the history of gaming to this point. Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga is on a completely different level from almost any other game that's been made in terms of photorealism, in terms of motion capture, in terms of the environments, in terms of the world.
I did not ask you right.
This is a truly beautiful looking game, and it runs well too. On Xbox Series X, it does run at 30 frames per second, but again, because this is kind of a cinematic game, 30 frames per second is actually closer to what a movie would be, which would be 24 frames per second. So it actually kind of works, and considering that the gameplay and combat isn't terribly fast or that great, so it's not like you're feeling you're missing out if you don't have that instantaneous response time, this actually kind of works for the game for it to run in 30 frames per second. I know that Starfield ran in 30 frames per second on Xbox Series X, and they're trying to patch it so it increases that frame rate, but that game was not nearly as cinematic as this one. Senua's Saga is an incredible looking game, and for graphics and presentation, I have to give it a 5.0 out of 5. Truly incredible. Alright, the second category is gameplay and controls, and this gameplay and controls. This is the worst part of Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. I am not going to disagree with the people who are slamming it for that. The controls are not responsive, they're not fun. You're going to spend a lot of time with your thumb on a controller like this, pushing forward on the left stick. It's going to get sore. You're going to be holding down that bumper to try and run faster. It's not great. It's not even good, I would say. The combat, I think, is okay. Again, it's very similar to Hellblade 1. Cinematic as hell. It looks awesome when you're doing it, but it doesn't feel great. And it even lost a little bit from the prior one, because in the prior game there were enemies with shields, and you would hit the circle button and you can kick away the shield, and that's gone in this game. I think it's bound to another button or something. This is really the reason why people are complaining about the game. And I think, despite the fact that they made the decision to focus on the narrative, to focus on the cinematography, to focus on the graphics, to focus on the sound, they definitely sacrificed gameplay and controls. So in this case, I have to give Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga a 2.0 out of 5 for gameplay and controls. By far the weakest part of Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga, and it was the weakest part of Hellblade 1 Senua's Sacrifice as well, so nothing's really changed there. Next up is music and sound design, and this again is an incredible strength for Senua's Saga. There are only 2 games like this with this binaural audio that is this impressive, this detailed, and on top of it, when those music tracks kick in, it really does create an epic feeling for the scene. There are very few experiences that are like Senua's Saga in all of gaming, and the only other one that's really close is the original Hellblade 1. So for music and sound design, again, I have to give it a 5.0 out of 5. Next up is story and narrative. Now I will say again, I did prefer the original Hellblade 1 story and narrative a little bit to this one, although I don't mind the fact that Senua was in a little bit different place as a human being, and as a result she's able to focus on the needs of others, and that brings in some additional characters, which is not a bad thing overall. The story does have a progression to it, it does make sense. I do wish it went on a little bit longer in terms of a resolution. And again, it does feel like it's just missing that one final act to really make it a great story. So for story and narrative, I'm going to give Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga a 4.0 out of 5. Still a really strong story overall, and it's definitely a very cinematic and movie-like feeling story and progression. I just wish it was a little bit more, and I still do prefer the original Hellblade story to Hellblade 2. Alright, next up, fun factor. Now this is a difficult one for me because Hellblade 1 and Hellblade 2 are not designed to be very fun. They're not very gamified. The controls and gameplay are not very game-like, and it's not terribly fun to play through just because the nature of these stories is so gritty, is so brutal, visceral, grounded in this, not really reality, but more of a realistic look at combat in terms of people getting tired and breathing heavy and getting cut and damaged and hurt and knocked down, and it's a very gruesome, gritty kind of story, kind of game, and that does not necessarily translate to a whole lot of fun. I still think that there's fun to be found in it just because you're experiencing this story with these characters and these incredible visuals, but I do have to say the fun factor is another kind of secondary measure. I don't think it's as bad as gameplay and controls, but it's not terribly fun. So I'm going to give Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga a 3.0 out of 5 for fun factor. Alright, so that brings us to the overall conclusion and final score. And this is a tough one for me because Hellblade 2 is a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde game because it's very focused on what it wants to do well and what it wants to deliver to the player. But that is at the cost of gameplay, controls, fun factor, some really integral parts of a gaming experience. Hellblade 1, extremely similar. Those were all the same complaints with Hellblade 1. In addition to that, it's not a very long game, so you're not going to get much replayability out of it, though I do think it is good to experience a single time. I will say that I don't think there's anyone that's going to tell you that this is a $50 game that you should go out and pay $50 to play, but I would say that it's worth your 5 hours or so of game time using Game Pass if you are currently a Game Pass subscriber. There are much worse ways to spend your day than playing Hellblade 2 or Hellblade 1. In fact, that is the way I ended up playing it. I played Hellblade 1 a couple of days before Hellblade 2 came out, and it could be a fun few days just playing those two games back to back. Not so much because of how you're going to experience the gameplay side of it, but the stories, the way that it depicts psychosis, the unreal graphics and sound design of both games. It is something that should be experienced by most players. If you're 100% gameplay or nothing kind of person, then forget it. You're not going to like this game whatsoever. But if you don't mind a little cinematic flair, if you want to see what cutting edge graphics look like on these current gen systems, there is nothing that meets the level of Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga. Considering that I'm going to dock it for fun factor, for gameplay and controls, and the short run time that's probably missing a little bit of extra story there at the end, but giving it props where it's due, the incredible graphics, the incredible sound design, the strong story, incredible motion capture, great voice acting. There is a lot to like with Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga, and I think it's a great experience to go through, especially playing with the original game. So, for my overall score, I'm going to give Hellblade 2 Senua's Saga a 79 out of 100. Didn't quite crack the 80s for me, just because I know the desire was out there for Ninja Theory to step up to the plate and improve the gameplay side of it to make it feel more game-like. I understand the decision that they made. I don't think the game is trash. I definitely think it's worth your time, and it provides an experience you can't really get from any other series in gaming, at least to this point. So, again, 79, didn't quite crack 80. I would recommend playing it. I don't recommend paying $50 for it because it is only about a 5-6 hour game. There is a new game plus to it, but once you've played through the story, there isn't going to be a whole lot of difference in there. There aren't like major decisions that you have to make over the course of the story. So I would not pay 50 bucks for it. I absolutely would play it on Game Pass like I did. I do think it's an experience that's worth promoting in the gaming space, if for nothing more than it is completely different than any other game that you could be playing. Hellblade 1 and 2, Senua's Sacrifice and Senua's Saga are a one-of-a-kind series, and they should be recognized for that, even if they don't necessarily make the changes that gamers were hoping they would make in the follow-up. They stuck with their vision, they stuck with their goals, they stuck with the things that they wanted to be important, and they didn't address what gamers complained about for the first one, so they repeated a lot of the same mistakes. That all being said, this game has some of the highest highs of any game you'll ever play. Some of the best graphics you've ever seen, maybe the most graphically intensive game in the history of gaming. Some of the best sound and audio design, that goes for both games, and a story that is truly unique in the gaming space, especially considering Hellblade 1 and the metamorphosis of Senua into Hellblade 2. But let me know in the comments down below. Did you hate Hellblade 2? Are you listening to the people slamming it and just saying, I'm not going to bother downloading it? Are you one of those folks that actually went out and paid 50 bucks for it and think that it's getting a lot of hate unnecessarily? If you like this review, if you like my style, please go ahead and throw a like and a subscribe on there. It really helps out the channel a lot. But that's going to do it for today. So until next time, this is Pirates for Pirates Gaming saying thank you for watching, and I will see you there.